Hi boys and girls, Andrysiak-Montemurro here. Today I'm going to introduce you to the World Weather Handbook. Let's take a peek inside. If you look at the contents here, this is a reference book, so it's kind of like an encyclopedia of weather for different parts of the world. There's places in the Northern Hemisphere, Western Hemisphere, Eastern Hemisphere, and Southern Hemisphere as well. I'm going to take a minute just to show you a couple different places, and we'll talk about patterns that we see. This right here, it says meteorologists get data about weather and climate at weather stations like this one. Wondering about weather. What's the weather like today where you live? What's happening with temperature, precipitation, and wind? Have you ever wondered about the weather in other cities and countries? This is a book that describes weather patterns in different places around the world. You can also read about climate, the typical weather that happens in a place over a long time. Some places have seasons, times of year when certain kinds of weather are more common. You might think about seasons as summer, fall, winter, and spring. Meteorologists think about precipitation and temperature when they describe seasons. For example, some places in the world have a warm season and a cold season. Other places have a wet season and a dry season. In some places, the seasons are not very different from each other. There are even places that don't have seasons because the weather there is almost always the same. So we're going to take a look at a couple different places and see what their seasons are like. So our very first place is called Akumal, Mexico. It's a city. Oh, and actually, I'll draw your attention here. It shows that it is north of the equator, so it's in the northern hemisphere. Right here where the dot is, there's a nice, beautiful tropical picture, which makes sense because we know that places near the equator are pretty wet and rainy and tropical and warmer than other places. Here it says Akumal is a city on the coast of Mexico. This part of Mexico is in Central America, the narrow strip of land that joins North and South America. Akumal has hot weather all year, and you can see that on this bar graph. It's usually between 80 and 90 some degrees throughout the entire year, so there's not really a cold season. The average high temperature for each month is between 83 degrees and 91 degrees Fahrenheit. Akumal does not have much of a warm or cold season since it's hot all year, but precipitation does change throughout the year. From May to October is Akumal's wet season, when it rains most days. The dry season is from December to April. Hurricanes strike Akumal every few years, bringing heavy rain and very strong winds. Akumal has warm, clear water where sea turtles live. Because it is warm all year and it usually just rains for a little while at a time, people go diving and swimming even during the wet season. And you can see there's definitely a difference here. We see the months that would be part of the wet season would be June, September, and October. And the driest months would be probably March, April, and probably February as well. If we look at a different place, Anchorage, Alaska is also in the northern hemisphere. It's north of the equator, but farther north, farther away from the equator than Akumal, Mexico. And you can see that it's definitely colder there. Anchorage is in the state of Alaska. Alaska is closer to the North Pole than any other state in the United States. Anchorage has a short warm season from May to September and a long cold season from October to April. The average high temperature can be as cold as 23 degrees Fahrenheit or as warm as 65 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on the month. Anchorage has some precipitation throughout the year, but there's a wet season from July to October and a dry season from November to June. The precipitation is rain when it's warm and snow when it's cold. Many moose live in Anchorage. During the cold season, hundreds of moose come out of the mountains into the city, where it is a little warmer. They often eat the trees in front of people's houses and then sleep leaning against the houses to stay warm. And if you look at the bar graphs here, you can definitely see that they have a warmer season during June, July, August, and definitely colder in those winter months of November, December, January, and February. And the precipitation, you can even see their rainy season right here is August and September, and their dry season is March and April. So on your Google Slides, what you're going to do is you can go ahead and flip through this book. There's lots of different places and different parts of the world if you want to travel into the Southern Hemisphere and check those out. And I want you to tell me, so for example, Cape Town, South Africa, Does it have a hot season and a cold season? If we look at the bar graph here, does it have a rainy season and a dry season? If we look at the precipitation bar graph over here. And if it does, if it doesn't, how do you know? And if it does, what are the wettest months and driest months? What are the hottest months and coldest months? All right, good luck on your slideshows and stay curious.